All right, so welcome to Karen Rogers. She is going to be talking to us today about her educational and career journey from psychology major to counseling and everything she's doing now. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much. Um, I'm going to tell my story because it's really informative in terms of helping you to make decisions about what you want to do and what you can do given your degree, and things that some things that are important to know about that you don't necessarily learn about in school. Um, so it kind of just depends on your program and what place they're coming from, and what they think is important for you to learn in terms of actual the work in the field. So I started as a young person. I'm one of those rare creatures that knew what she wanted to do early on and pursued my education, and really didn't make a big career changes to other fields, which many people do. So many people who start out with a degree don't work in their degree area. I think that's I'm not a good statistics quoter, but I know that is true. Um, People tend to change careers at some point in their lives. But for me, as a child, I was always interested in all the shows about animals and their behavior. Back in our day, it wasn't. It was National or Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. That's what I watched when I was a kid, and I got very interested in animal behavior. And then as I got older and wandered out of the family nest and into the world, those interests transitioned to people instead of animals. And that was really a more realistic, I think it was a really more realistic choice, because not everybody gets to be out with the apes or out in the Sahara, filming wildlife in their native environments. And, those are things that really thrill children and adults, but becoming more interested in people and what they did and why they did it. That's what drew me. So by the time I was 15, I was training to be a peer counselor in my high school, which was pretty radical for a Catholic all-girls high school to be doing in the 70s, and not to be confused with what we call rap now. Rap back in the 70s was talking, which is what rap music is about, that form of that poetic expression. But we had a rap room, and girls could come in to talk about anything that they wanted to talk about. And we did not have to report to administration unless we were concerned about somebody's safety. So that was pretty amazing in that day and time that we would be able to do that. So I started my counseling experience as a peer counselor in my high school, and then decided to major in psychology. I really didn't even know about other areas. Like, I didn't really know much about social work. And I'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. So I lived in Pennsylvania. I went to school in the state university system, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which is in Indiana, Pennsylvania. Not to be confused with Indiana University in Indiana. But I got a very good education there. Really, I'm the kind of student who, I'm a type A personality, raised to be my best at all times, and, worked hard in school. And as I did in high school, with volunteering as a peer counselor, I continued to do that volunteer work in different spaces so that I would already have a resume building toward my goal of work, or my goal of getting into college, because I had an interest and experience already in the area that I wanted to major in. So I would strongly encourage, if you haven't been doing volunteer work in the field that you're interested in, that you should definitely look into that. I think for one thing, it helps you to get a more realistic idea of what the work is about. and helps you to test out if this really is a fit for you in terms of your personality and the way that you think, and what you think that you want to do. So for me, those volunteer experiences were, they were really good. They were interesting and they were powerful. And I did some volunteer work at a child development center for kids that had developmental disabilities, which back then we called mental retardation. I also did hotline, uh, answering a hotline, suicide hotline, and just mental health emergency hotline while I was in college. And all those experiences, of course, came with training as well. So you're getting training through the people that are actually doing the work, which is somewhat different than getting your academic training. And it builds confidence. If you're able to go in as a young person and um, work in something that's related to your interests, a human service organization of some kind, you will get some real world experience that is really valuable, I think. It really built my confidence. I call myself a shy extrovert. I'm very extroverted, but I have, part of my nature is kind of shy. So being able to walk into those spaces and sell yourself, because, it's like a job interview. You have to sell yourself to a volunteer situation as well, and then perform. I also did an internship while I was in college, which is not part of the program, but was optional. And I did that at a state mental hospital in Pennsylvania. So those were some of the things that I set down as my foundation for my education and career. So I majored in psychology, clinical psychology. As you may know, there are different fields of psychology that you can be in. You can be in experimental psychology, organizational psychology, developmental psychology, educational psychology, and clinical psychology. And the thing about clinical psychology that drew me was that in clinical psychology, you're focusing on the evaluation and treatment of mental disorders. You focus on the individual, and you are focusing on psychopathology. So that means that, as a psychologist, which you cannot be in most states without a PhD now. But, there are other positions that you can do with a bachelor's degree in psychology or a master's degree. So I'll get into that a little bit. But as a clinical psychologist, your education is leading you toward the diagnosis of mental disorders, the diagnosis of psychopathology, and how to go about treating that, making recommendations and treatment, and engaging in treatment for people that have mental illness, as compared to a developmental psychologist, which is really focusing on that, or a counseling psychologist, which is focusing more from the aspect of wellness. And I suspect, although I haven't been in graduate school for 20 years, I suspect that even the clinical field is more holistic now and more concerned with the whole person and on wellness, because we have, as a society, moved so far into wellness that I would suspect that even in the clinical training programs, you're getting a good dose of wellness, not just that psychopathology. But remember when I said investigating and diagnosing psychopathology, a clinical psychologist is trained to use testing instruments that are restricted to who's allowed to use them, by the developers of the tests, as well as by the Association of American, no, state, I'm sorry, it's the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards. So there are regulations that have to do with all of these career choices that we're talking about today, which that is one of the things that I don't think we ever talked about in school. And that has a lot to do with what you will be able to do with your degree. So I was interested in psychopathology, and I was interested in psychological testing. And so my my choice was to be in clinical psychology and to do the things that would lead me in that direction. And then, of course, by the time you get finished with your bachelor's degree and you're looking for work, if you've been fortunate enough to have professors that can talk to you because they're working too, they're they have a private practice, or they work in an organization in addition to their teaching, that you're getting some of that real world information as well. But when you get to the point where you have that bachelor's degree and you're asking, well, what can I do with that degree? This is where the idea of how states regulate occupations and professions, and how they license people to be in certain occupations and professions, and how the state guidance and the federal guidance as far as who can do what and bill certain insurances like Medicaid and Medicare. All of these things, there are regulations about. Regulations may come from your state, they may be federal, they may be attached to the insurance company's plans. So with a bachelor's degree in clinical psychology, as I started to look for work, I saw that the kind of work I wanted to do, I was not going to be able to do with a bachelor's degree. And I could have done things like work in a group home as a tech, a group home for people with intellectual disabilities. I could have gotten a job as a substance abuse counselor, because there are positions that only require a bachelor's degree in the substance abuse counseling field. But there again, there's regulations. You can do group treatment, but you can't do individual. So you can't counsel individually with a bachelor's degree in most places. And when I came out of school, so I made the decision at that time to go to graduate school. But after going straight through college, I wasn't ready to commit to a PhD program, even though I knew that that might be what I would have to do eventually. As it happened, one of the professors where I went to school suggested a program at a very similar school, a state college, a state university in Kentucky. And I went to Eastern Kentucky University and got my master's degree in clinical psychology there. There is a lot of regard held for, big name schools that, are prestigious and are extremely expensive. And for a middle class person, that I was, my family couldn't afford to send me to one of those places. I got very good grades in school, but my GREs, graduate record exams, were not that great. My ACTs were, above average, but not high. So all of these factors come into consideration. Now you can get into graduate school without doing some of those things. But back in the 1980, you had to have a graduate record exam. We had to do a test called Miller Analogies, which was a measure of your abstract reasoning ability. I don't even know if they do that test anymore, but so I got into EKU, which for me was really a good thing, because in Kentucky at the time, they did not have enough doctoral level psychologists to do the work that was needed by statute. In order for people to participate in certain programs, they had to be evaluated. If you had a developmental disability and you were receiving services under their state system of care, which was the Mental Retardation Board, you had to be evaluated every 3 years in order to continue in those programs, and they just did not have enough psychologists to go around. So at that time, they had a provision for master's level people to do some of the work, and they trained us at the PhD level in some of these areas. And as the laws changed over time, it's like the PhDs had a big lobby, and they were pushing against allowing less than PhDs to do some of the work. And this is similar to what happens with clinical social work. clinical social workers have a huge lobby, and they push back against other licensed providers to keep some of the work to themselves. And, just quite frankly, that's what it is. I can't bill Medicare, even though I'm a licensed mental health counselor. But if I were a licensed clinical social worker, I could, because that's just what Medicare, that's what they decided, is just to have the LCSWs allowed to do that work independently. So as you can see, what you want to do may not be what you can do with your degree. And the decision that you make to go to graduate school, you also need to be mindful of what do you want to do, what degree is going to give you the best opportunity, what are your interests really about, and how do you move forward with that. So to kind of make this story a little shorter, so I worked in Kentucky in a community mental health center for my first year. Then I took a break and then stepped out of the field for a year, did something else. Then I came back in, and after having met my future husband, needed to move to the northern Kentucky, Cincinnati area. Cincinnati, Ohio did not have, they had master's level school psychologists, which I was not a school psychologist, although I did a lot of testing in the schools as a clinical psychologist I could. So here I was, I had a certification, which eventually became a certified clinical psychologist with autonomous functioning, which is a long term that means we're grandfathering you in. We're not going to let people do this in the future, but right now you can act independently as a psychologist, and there are only two things you can't do, and they had to do with is a person not guilty by reason of insanity or incompetent to proceed through the legal system. So I eventually, I went to work in Cincinnati. I had no kind of licensure there. They didn't have a licensure law for counselors. They didn't have a master's grandparenting in for psychology. And so I worked in the field in a community mental health center, doing some aftercare counseling, eventually supervising a case management program. And then at some point in time, Ohio passed a licensure law, and those of us who were already licensed elsewhere could apply to be grandfathered in. They had so many people apply to be grandfathered in that it took 2 years for me to get my license, even though it was grandfathering, and everybody else that tested for the license was already getting licensed. So it was really unbelievable. And then so I worked there, and then I worked in private practice as a psychologist because I could. I had a practice where I did a lot of psychological testing for the Division of Disabilities determinations. If you apply for Social Security or supplemental security income, you undergo, on the basis of a mental or emotional problem, you undergo a psychological evaluation in many cases and a mental status exam. And those reports are sent in, and the people who determine disabilities use that information to make their decisions. As a psychologist, we didn't make the decision. We just stated the person's abilities based upon the evaluations. So if you think that you would like something that involves structured, formalized testing, where you're investigating a question, does this person have an intellectual disability? Does this person have a psychopathology? When compared to the general population, does this test reveal that they have traits of schizophrenia? That's what you would do in the field of psychology as a clinical psychologist. So I did that for a while, 10 years in private practice. I held different contracts with different organizations, schools, jails, to do evaluations. We would go into the jail and evaluate if they were concerned someone was suicidal. We would go into the jail and interview that person and make a recommendation as to whether they should be in isolation on 15-minute watch, whether they needed to have their clothing and their sheets taken and be put in a suicide gown. So you can work in the criminal justice field with a degree in psychology or clinical social work. In some areas, the rules don't apply, like the military called people psychologists who weren't PhDs, but that was how the military classified positions. So a lot of these things may have changed over the years, but the thing that hasn't changed is that there are a set of rules that regulate who is considered a therapist, who is considered a psychologist, who is considered a mental health counselor, what is a marriage and family counselor, and that, there may be testing involved, there are internships involved, there are graduate degrees involved. And so knowing that before you go further is really important. If you don't think you would like that regimented testing, you have to do it a certain way. These are evidence-based practices. Our field is so much more science-based now than ever. In fact, we used to go back and forth when granting degrees. Did you have a Bachelor of Arts in psychology or a Bachelor of Science in psychology? Is your program in the School of Humanities, or is it in the School of Sciences, or is it in the School of Social Sciences? I believe that my bachelor's is a BA and that my master's is an MS. That just is about how your school sees it. So as I progressed, in my life and careers and the geographical moves I made, so I was a certified psychologist in Kentucky. I eventually became a licensed clinical counselor in Ohio. I moved back to Pennsylvania for a little while, where they did not have a counselor licensing law, nor did they have a practice law for master's level psychology. So there again, I didn't need to be licensed. There wasn't a license. I became involved in assertive community treatment, which is a multidisciplinary treatment team that works with people that have severe mental illness. That group of individuals is my preferred group to serve. I really enjoy working with people that have severe mental illness. And over the years, I have moved from a clinical practice to managing programs and developing programs. I've had opportunities to work on grants, to be part of the grant writing team, and to win grants, state and federal, to implement programs that are new to our area. And now I'm at the point in my career where I'm mentoring people to move into my place when I step out, which will be a couple of years from now. So when we moved to Florida, I discovered that Florida's licensing laws are very tough. Probably to keep people from, like, I'm a snowbird, I think I'll work for 6 months, and then I'm going to go back home. And in the meantime, I'm taking up a job that somebody who has lived in Florida for their whole lives would want. So they made those laws tough. And here's another important point. My master's degree in psychology, although it was a 60-hour degree, which 60 hours is required for licensure, the transcript requirements did not match the licensed mental health counselor transcript requirements. Had I not procrastinated, because when I took the job I had in Florida, they told me I did not need to be licensed. So I did not immediately pursue it. I still had 3 kids in school, and we just moved, thousands of miles away. And had I pursued my licensure right away, it would have been a different story, because right that year, they changed the requirements. I might have made it through with only needing 1 or 2 classes, but I ended up needing 21 graduate hours on top of a 60-hour master's degree. And I actually was on the State Board of Psychology as one of the master's level representatives, and I actually sat in on disciplinary hearings, and I had to go back to school and take a 3-hour credit course in ethics, because the course I had was only one credit hour. So here I was in Florida, back in school. You can imagine how much money that costs, in addition to time and effort, to take 21 more credit hours. But I did it. Fortunately, other things they accepted in terms of my application. I had the requisite number of practicum and internship hours, and I could prove all of that, and that was really good. So I learned a lot, though, actually, because I learned things about the differences between, what a mental health counselor does and what a psychologist does. I mean, I knew that, but, seeing more the greater focus on developmental issues, the greater focus on, the span of life issues that come with counseling psychology. What I've seen in my career is, as I mentioned earlier, is what a licensed clinical social worker can do that that others of us cannot do with our licensure, and that is work in nursing homes, bill Medicare. That's why they can work in nursing homes, because they can bill Medicare. And this kind of thing. We get higher rates for LCSWs from some insurance companies than we do for our licensed mental health counselors. So there's a whole credentialing process that you have to go through when you're going to be in a position where insurance is billed under your name. Things like, I could bill, Medicare could bill for me if there was a doctor in the building. And I can tell you, I love psychiatry. I love many psychiatrists, but if you really want to know who knows people and who knows how to treat people, we can't prescribe meds, right? Although in some states, there are psychologists who take advanced training and can actually prescribe meds. But we can't prescribe meds, but we know an awful lot about the people that we're working with. And a doctor doesn't get that in 15 minutes of a med check with people. So think about what you're interested in. If you're interested in working with children, if you're interested in working with elderly, if you're interested in being that investigator that diagnoses based upon validated tests, there are surveys that you can give with as a counselor or as an LCSW or as a LMFT. Plenty of different kinds of surveys and questionnaires that we use that are science-based. But not limited to like an individual intellectual assessment that a psychologist would do, or Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory, or actually a Rorschach ink blot. I had a whole course in Rorschach. Didn't really use it that much, but those were things that were fascinating, and develop your writing skills to write reports. So where you're going to be, what you want to do, really used up our time before we got questions, but I could talk about these things forever. So can we take just a few minutes for questions?
Sure. Yeah, I'm very flexible on time if you are.
Okay. Yeah, I am.
There's a couple, well, there's one question that asks, and I had the same question, are there any internships or jobs that students in psychology, and this is bachelor's, pretty early bachelor's degree, can take to get experience or even to get paid? And I know I had contacted one of the HR people at Lifestream about the behavioral tech, because I'm a little confused about, is that something that
yes, you don't need a degree to be a behavioral tech. There is a certification that if you can get that certification, you will be paid better. But I see behavioral tech as part of the career ladder. A lot of people who are still in school choose to work as behavior techs, whether it's full-time or part-time.
What is that? What is a behavioral tech?
Oh, okay. So a behavioral tech is usually someone that works in a hospital or residential unit where they need extra people to have eyes on, just kind of monitoring what people are doing, assisting them with some self-care activities. Behavioral tech might be the person that is watching someone who's on suicide watch. They have requirements. They may have 24 hours eyes on. Okay. And that means that you're eyes on that person 24 hours, and they switch out shifts, on and off during shifts to give people a break. Behavioral techs might be the person that checks you, wands you for any contraband if you're coming in on an emergency, to make sure that you don't have something you can harm yourself with. They may be the person that brings you down to the cafeteria. They do chart, they make notes, they're doing rounds in the middle of the night. They can work overnight shifts. Some programs, they do more in different things because, a hospital inpatient stay is different than a residential treatment program where they have more flexibility. They're out walking around, they're going places in a van. So people may be doing those kinds of things. Other bachelor's level positions would include other positions that you could do with a bachelor's level would be, as I said, the substance abuse counseling you can do with a bachelor's degree. We do things besides just the treatment and rehabilitation aspect at Lifestream. We also are involved in child welfare services. A bachelor's degree will enable you to become a child welfare care manager. These are the individuals that work with a family whose either their children have been removed or their children are at risk of being removed. And there's a case manager assigned to make sure that the children's needs are getting met, whether they're still in the home or in placement, and that the parents are doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, which may be going to see the master's level therapist for part of their treatment because maybe it's a substance abuse problem or a mental health problem that caused them to be neglectful or abusive of their children. So that's a position that a bachelor's level can do. Mental health case management can be done by a bachelor's level. That would be linking, monitoring, and advocating for people who have a serious mental illness who are at risk for repeat admissions to the psychiatric hospital or the state hospital. Bachelor's level staff can also do what we call recovery specialist work, which may be within the hospital or in a residential treatment program, but they have a higher level of responsibility. They may be assisting with assessments. Bachelor's level can do intake assessments, biopsychosocials is what we call them. But as I said, they can't do individual treatment. They can do group treatment, both for mental health and substance use, but not individual. Let's see, we talked about child welfare, we talked about mental health, we talked about substance use. Right now, there is a lot happening in terms of what we call care coordination and care management. And some of the insurance companies employ people in this role. And that's that's a newer thing over the past 10 years or so for insurance companies. They have people that are actually following individuals to see if they're getting treatment and if it is helping them, or getting them connected to services if they're not. Because if a person is in services, if they're receiving treatment compared to a person who's not receiving treatment, the person without treatment is at higher risk for higher cost interventions. So if if you have a psychiatric illness and you're not receiving treatment, then your risk for hospitalization is high because mental illnesses are chronic relapsing conditions. And some of them are progressive, that they will worsen over the years. So without treatment, we know that they worsen and that people's future episodes, tend to be more difficult to manage. And that medication is more likely to be effective if it's started early and it's the right meds. So insurance companies are invested in people being in treatment because it reduces their costs. Financial considerations are at the basis of so many things. Your income will go up if you're licensed, more than just a master's degree and much more than a bachelor's degree. As I said, LCSW is more lucrative, but let's get back to your question so we can maybe get a couple more of them in.
Sure. One really quick, is there an age requirement for the behavioral tech? Probably 18?
18,
Okay.
Yes.
Another student commented that personality disorders is where her interest lies. I don't know if she wants to expand upon that or just ask your opinion on that.
Well, I would say that any of the clinical degrees are going to be necessary. You may work in a residential facility as a bachelor's level person assisting with someone who has a personality disorder, but to actually be involved in treatment, then you would need to have a higher credential. I would also say that not every master's social work program will be as clinically, what's the word I want? Not every master's social work program is going to have the kind of quality clinical degree that you might want. So make sure that you look at what's offered, because you want to be prepared to pass that exam if you go into a master's program in clinical social work. And some are better than others, just like all different degrees. So much has changed with things being virtual, and with so many private for-profit universities out there, that you need to investigate a little bit before you choose a school, to make sure that you're going to be getting what you want, that's going to put you on the career path that you want to be on. So I think looking at what they offer, are they CACREP accredited? That's a question that you need to answer before you start a master's program. Please be aware that a general psychology master's degree does not get you anything more than you can do with a bachelor's degree in psychology.
So do you,
It's a master's degree, and it proves that that you've had more education, but it doesn't prepare you for counseling or treatment positions.
so do your research before grad school,
Yes.
for sure.
Go to your career office and
Right.
ask them lots of questions.
Another question is, can you explain how your experiences in 4 different states helped you along your career path? And although you went over how you managed to get licensed in Florida, what advice would you give someone who doesn't know exactly where they want to be licensed eventually to cover more bases?
Okay, so this is more research to do. So Florida doesn't have good reciprocity rules. And what that means is that even though I was a licensed professional clinical counselor in Ohio, Florida did not offer immediate licensure based upon an agreement between the states of reciprocity for those licenses. So my Ohio license would not automatically make me eligible for the Florida license. So you want to know, does the state where you're studying, where you're likely to maybe get licensed, have reciprocity with other states that you might be interested in living in? LCSW probably has better reciprocity across the states than licensed mental health counselors, because there's not even a common language for licensed mental health counselors. Ohio was licensed professional clinical counselor. Other places it's licensed clinical counselor. But that LCSW pretty much, I'm not an LCSW, so I'm only telling you what I understand, which may not be 100% accurate. So investigate. Choose wisely. Look at the laws of the state that you're in or where you think you might want to live, and see what's required. So you want to look for mental health laws. You want to look for occupational health laws. You want to go on the occupational health websites for your state to see what's regulated and what's not, and use that as a guide for some of your choices. And also, if you don't know about the Health Occupations and Career Handbook, which is a publication by the federal government, that tells you a lot about what career field you might want to be in and what degrees are required, and where the openings are. Like, we're not going to have positions for coal miners in Florida, right? So if you want to be a coal miner in Florida, you're not going to find a job. However, if you would like to become employed at Lifestream Behavioral Center, we're currently growing, so we really have a lot of open positions. I'm sorry, I digress. Go back to your questions.
That's great. So is that off that Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Health Occupations and Career Handbook?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I put that in the chat. That is good.
Have I answered everybody's questions that asked so far?
Yes, there's one other one that is, what exactly is LCSW?
Licensed Clinical Social Worker. Bachelor's level social workers work in places like the Social Security office, the food stamp office, as I said, child welfare positions, but clinical social work, they are trained in the clinical fields to recognize and treat people with mental health concerns. The perspectives that we take from our disciplines influence, what we do and how we do it. So for me, my career has shifted from that focus on psychopathology to more a focus on recovery and the whole person, because of the roles that I've been in and where my licensure ended up. So, there again, I kind of lost my train of thought on that, but keep in mind, if you're interested in the person in a system, if the person in society and in a system is what you're interested in working with, then you want to look at social work. If you're interested in working with the person in a family and working with couples and helping families be together and stay together, then you might want to look at marriage and family counseling as a career path. So all of, psychology looks at the individual, social workers look at the system, the community, LMFTs, licensed mental marriage and family therapists look at the family system and where the family fits within the greater system. Social psychologists look at the psychology of the society. Industrial psychologists look at the person in the work environment and the work environment as it contributes to or takes away from the person's functioning. So there are so many different avenues to explore that, have fun, do it now. And, and then try to fit your volunteer work into that area that you think that you want to pursue, because that'll help you to really know if that's what you want to do.
That's a great idea. So if you care about the homeless or the
Yeah,
or volunteer at a homeless shelter type of
right,
thing.
exactly.
Okay.
If you care about veterans, all these fields, you can work with veterans. But the VA hires LCSWs.
Okay. Social work. Okay.
Or PhD psychologists. They have a lot of psychologists. The Veterans Administration and the prisons are probably the largest employers of clinical psychologists, while the schools, of course, are the employers of school psychologists.
Okay, I know.
Which is different from guidance counseling. So there you go. It's all over the place.
We're way over time. Do you have time for another question?
I do. If they have time, I have time.
All right. It looks like, and students, you can, if you'd rather have it in your voice, unmute, but one that's in here is, what field do you recommend for people who want to speak for the voiceless, essentially things like victims' rights, people with mental health disorders, etc.
Okay. If you're interested in advocacy on that higher level, then I think that social work is probably the field that you want to be in. If you're interested in advocacy at the individual level, then psychology or counseling would work. There's a field now of behavior analysis, and I believe they offer bachelor's degrees in some places in behavior analysis. You can become a behavior analyst, and that is a very structured approach to shaping behavior. It's very behavioralist. B.F. Skinner comes to mind, that you're looking at what rewards this behavior, what prompts that behavior, what rewards it, and how do we break that chain so that we shape people out of their problematic behaviors and into the behaviors that we want them to engage in. A lot of that is done in the field of autism and in general in intellectual disabilities. Bachelor's degree also can do one-on-one work with families who have funding from the government to have aides within their homes. Some of that work might not even require a bachelor's degree.
Yep. I have a friend who does that. Does social work touch on sociopathic disorders?
A clinical social work training program will, yes. You do have to know how to diagnose and treat mental disorders and sociopathy and psychopathology as an LCSW.
And would that would be at a master's level then?
That would be at a master's level, right?
Very good. The only other one in there is, what was it like finding a job after graduation, the private practices and contracts and that type of thing?
I was fortunate to have mentors that helped me into private practice, and people that I knew from graduate school who went on for PhDs. So that's another thing that you get with your volunteer work and your internships. You make connections for future jobs. And if you do a great job if you have an internship, as I said, we had a credit gathering internship at the bachelor's level in the school I went to. So I could do that for credit as one of my electives. It wasn't required. So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit on that one too. What was it? Read the question again for me, Ann.
It was about finding a job. What was that?
Oh, okay. Like? Okay. So you can rely on the career opportunities that happen at your school, that people come in to interview. Look for the civil service, the opportunities within the government. Some programs are run by, in some states are run by the government, and you have to take a civil service exam to get into those jobs. You know, rely on the connections that you're making with your internships and your volunteer work. Practice, practice, practice. If they offer video sessions, if they offer mock interviews with video, I did that. That was very helpful. Take public speaking, do a Dale Carnegie course to help yourself to be the best candidate, because it'll help your confidence and help your public speaking, help you through interviews. But always practice for interviews. I say, know your resume, practice it, practice answers to questions you think you might be asked, and research the company that you want to work for, because they like that. When you come in and you already know, oh, I see that you have these programs and that programs, and you're accredited under this, and they like interviewers like that. They like to know that you did your homework.